Welcome to The Link Online. Yes, we're here once again, live on Facebook and, of course, live on the RCI Radio Canada International channel as well, if you happen to be tuning in. Glad to have you with us. It's good morning in some parts of the world, good afternoon in others, and good evening in some other parts of the world, because this is the internet and we're worldwide. So you could be anywhere in the world at any time watching this show, even if it's live.
We're timeless.
We're timeless. There it is. There's a timeless image of the Canadian flag as well. So here we are in studio once again. I'm Mark Montgomery, and with me today, Terry Haig.
Hi, Mark.
And Levon Savance.
Hello.
And in the control room with their fingers on the button, Léo Boulanger, Charles-Antoine Lemay, and Commander Dutil.
Can you even say his name?
Commander Dutil.
God, what a thrill to be in the same room.
Charles-Antoine knows. I mean, he's been with us before. He says, yeah, we know those guys. It's okay. We forgive them. All right, we have some interesting stuff coming up on the show today. By the way, I just want to say hello to listeners in World Radio Paris and the shortwave service from Germany, and our friends at Kauri 97.5 FM radio in Nigeria, who are joining us as well every week at this time as we present news from Canada, important news, and we have some really important news today. Terry, yours starts off the show. What do you have today?
Scientists from around the world are, Greta keeps saying we got to listen to the science. Now the scientists apparently are listening to Greta, and there's an amalgamation coming between them. They've written a big letter that was published about, it's time to do something about the climate. It's an emergency.
And not just a few of them either. These are
lots.
Thousands of them.
11,000.
Oh, there you go. Levon, what about you?
Well, I'll talk about this Canadian couple who are getting some help from Canadian egg farmers in running a charity project in Eswatini in southern Africa.
Okay. And of course, as we approach Remembrance Day in Canada, a new book has just come out describing one of the fiercest battles of World War II involving one of Canada's oldest regiment, and that was at Verrières Ridge. That's coming up a little bit later on the program on this edition of The Link Online. All right, as mentioned, we're going to start off with your story, Terry, because it certainly is extremely important. We do talk about the environment quite a bit on the program, and there are now, as you mentioned, some scientists who are writing about this.
Yeah, 11,258 scientists from 153 countries, 409 of them from Canada, signed a joint letter published in the journal Bioscience that was released Tuesday. The same day, Donald Trump officially notified the UN that the U.S. would withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement. Yeah, nothing like irony, effective in 1 year's time. The letter article is entitled World Scientists Warning of a Climate Emergency, which is basically all you have to know. Now, I had the pleasure of speaking on Wednesday with Queen's University biologist Lonnie Arnson. He's the author of What Are We? Exploring the Evolutionary Roots of Our Future. He was one of the Canadians who signed the letter warning of the climate emergency. I asked him about the role that Greta Thunberg and her friends taking to the streets are playing in getting scientists to take tougher political stands as they face the environmental crisis.
It was really noticeable in every segment of society to see this. I mean, there were already students and youth putting together petitions and potential lawsuits for, ruining their environment or stuff like that. But Greta Thunberg became, because of her talents and her opportunities, that together made her just so effective in hitting the emotional triggers that everyone is susceptible to, and academics are no different than anyone else when it comes to that. I've got a couple of grandchildren, and I'm thinking about their future, and I'm pretty pessimistic, to be honest with you. There's a lot of signals that say unless we step up to the plate really fast and really hard, there's going to be some significant pain in the very near future, certainly within my children and grandchildren's lifetime, probably within some of my lifetime, possibly. It's going to be bad. And so Greta just was one of those one of those things that spoke to so many people because she's, she's a child. Really, she's still a child, and yet she's so persuasive. When a child speaks the way she's able to speak, people are going to listen because it's persuasive. You don't expect to hear that kind of thing from youth so articulately, and so everyone's paying attention to it, and it's affected everyone, including academics.
And she's fearless.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, so you said that you weren't optimistic. Why?
Well, as I said, I'm not a doomsayer, and so it kind of goes against my grain to say something like this publicly. But I'm not optimistic that we're going to be able to avoid a lot of the pain associated with collapsing civilization. I mean, it's not just climate change. It's just about everything about the civilization that we've built, in this march of progress since at least the last 10,000 years, that's gotten us into trouble. Too many people, too much stuff. We got too many people using too much stuff, and the most urgent now signal of that is the effect of that on climate change. And so, it's just a huge, big thing about a collapsing civilization that lots of academics have been writing about. And, I've studied it and I teach about it, and it bothers me. But we're talking about Homo sapiens here. That's what we are. I'm an evolutionary biologist, and my view is that, we came from a long lineage. Our species came from a long lineage, most of which was not human. And that's not a popular topic for the general public. It's basically Darwinism. That's what I do. Every biologist does research and teaching that's grounded in Darwinism. And Darwinism is something that the general public just has a really hard time appreciating.
That is part of my conversation with Professor Lonnie Arnson, an evolutionary biologist at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. He was one of 409 scientists from Canada to sign this past week's letter declaring a climate emergency. Of course, Greta, as I mentioned before, Greta keeps telling everyone to listen to the science, but it seems that more and more now, scientists are getting out of their labs and joining up, especially older guys with children and grandchildren, who are saying, I mean, this is it, man. I mean, the kids see it. The kids see what's coming. And it's up. And now whether the grown-ups are going to see what's coming and do something about it and join with those kids, right, Lee? Remains to be seen. Right? No, you guys, come on. The kids get it.
No, it's obviously a very serious, extremely serious thing. But, I see all kinds of people who just completely don't get it, whether it be engineers or whether it be parents or other students. Now, you say young people see this. I'm not entirely sure I agree with that, because I go past 2 high schools every day on my way to work, to and from work.
Yeah.
And in the morning and in the evening, I see the parents come, and some of the teenagers have cars too, and they sit there waiting for their friends with the engines idling, and we know that idling engines are the most inefficient and produce lots of pollution for no good reason whatsoever, and yet they sit there with their engines running and say, wait a minute, just turn your engine off. You're waiting for 15 minutes, But,
we need a politician who's going to step up. But any politician that steps up and starts talking about these things, who's got power, is going to get voted out immediately, right? Because like he says, we got too much stuff.
Well, here's another thing: planned obsolescence.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
I mean, good heavens! My phone died. My smartphone died, which wasn't very smart of it, by the way. And I was saying, this is an expensive thing. Why can't I repair it? Oh, repair costs too much money. Just throw it out. And then I got into a long discussion, and they said the new phones, for example, you can't even change the battery.
No, I know. It's amazing.
And I said, where's the progress? We're talking about pollution, and we're making these products which causes pollution to make them, and then we throw them out because they're irreparable, and that causes pollution, and you have to buy new ones because you don't have them anymore. So that causes pollution. So where's the progress? And the guy said,
I think we should hear from the realpolitik guy.
Well, I mean, I know, I totally agree with Mark. It's,
Mark?
This phone in a year or so, it's only, 2 years old, it will be absolutely useless. Because I have the same problem. I have a perfectly good computer that is, I cannot update anymore because there's no way of, fixing or adding more memory because that's the way it's designed.
Yeah.
And nothing else is wrong with the computer, but because I cannot add more memory, at some point I will have to throw it away. And this is the way business works, and unless we as individual consumers, you talk about governments, but I think it's individual consumers who have the power in their pockets to that will force corporations and force governments to adopt measures that help us consume less.
Well, how are you going to force a company to say, look, when you're making this phone, and a lot of these products are now made offshore, so Canada has no authority to dictate, but how are you going to say, you have to make this thing repairable, so that instead of wasting all this resources to make a new one, we can use a little bit of resources to repair this one? I mean, that's the way this progress is. We get these throwaway things, right?
It can be legislated. It can, and I'm sure there are other people like me who don't need to have a phone that's only 2 millimeters wide. I can perfectly do with a phone that is 1 centimeter wide if I can change the battery in it.
Yeah. Wow.
It's like, I'm sure there is a business case to be made about making things that are repairable.
Here's the thought. We're all old enough to remember when something broke, you took it to the repair shop, whether it was a toaster or a radio or shoes.
Or TVs.
Or well, any electronic devices, but you used to be able, there were people who could repair it, and it was cheaper than buying a new product. And now, because these products come from offshore where they're paying slave workers 2 cents a day kind of thing, you get these products for very, very cheap. They don't last very long. You throw them out, you buy a new one. You throw it out, you buy a new one,
So this is what the kids are dealing with. This is what they see our generation doing. Right? I'm sure they're doing it. I mean, they must be doing it too, God knows, with their phones. But no wonder they're terrified.
Yeah.
I mean, what are we leaving them?
Well, as Greta Thunberg said in that speech to the UN, how dare you?
Yeah.
And it was... So anyway, if you have
and furthermore, if elected...
I will not run.
I promise. Dutil will be my chief of staff, all right?
If you listening have thoughts on this, send us some emails. Write to us, and we'll share your thoughts as well. So that's something we can talk about in future, as we certainly will, because environmental issues are not going away anytime soon.
Absolutely not.
All right, coming up once again, we're going to be looking at a humanitarian kind of aid project coming up in Africa. All right, this is a story of a couple of very successful business people in Toronto, but for the last several years they've been doing something quite different. And Levon, this is your story.
Yeah, Janine and Ian Maxwell were born and grew up in Ontario. Janine ran a very successful marketing agency in Toronto. And right now they're running a charity called Heart for Africa in Eswatini. It's a tiny South African kingdom. It used to be known as Swaziland up until about a year ago. They run an orphanage that cares for more than 250 orphaned and abandoned babies. And when I say babies, literally newborns up to the age of 9 years old. I think some of the older kids are now in their care. As part of that charity, they also run something called Project Canaan Farm. It's a 2,500-acre farm, and that's where they get help from some Canadian egg farmers. In fact, the egg farmers of Canada, it's you can call it an industry group or a lobby group that represents egg farmers in Canada, has helped them set up a huge egg farm. The president, or actually the CEO Egg Farmers of Canada, Tim Lambert, was so impressed when he heard about what Ian and Janine Maxwell were doing in Africa. He visited them once during one of his business trips and took a side trip to Eswatini to visit their operation. And he was so impressed that he got the entire, I guess, egg farming industry in Canada involved in this. And they built this 2 egg houses, or hen house. I don't know what they're called officially. They have 5,000 hens now and produce thousands of eggs every day. He got a Danish company to supply them with a special machinery that hard boils and then chills eggs. Some egg producers from Saskatchewan donated a delivery truck. And now, with the help of Egg Farmers of Canada, Janine and Ian, their operation delivers thousands of eggs every day to about 30 churches, community organizations in some of the most remote rural communities in Eswatini. And Janine and Ian are in Ottawa, and as part of their fundraising activity, you would imagine this probably takes a lot of money running this kind of a charity organization. And I caught them in Ottawa. I got them in one room with Tim, Ian and Janine around a teleconference machine, and we spoke on the phone. And one of the things I was really interested in was how did Janine and Ian end up in Eswatini of all places? Because, as I said, they had a very successful marketing company. And Janine explained me that, to make a long story short, she was in New York on 9/11 when the planes hit those towers. And for some very frantic few moments, her husband Ian, who was on a plane in Chicago, thought that Janine had died, and she thought that he had died in one of those planes that fell. So it kind of led them to reassess their life's priorities. And Janine said she embarked on this spiritual and almost literal journey for the search of basically the meaning of life. And she told me that search took her to Africa.
And that search took me to Africa, and I fell in love. I fell in love with the people. I fell in love with many of the countries that I traveled to, but my heart was specifically touched for these orphans these children who have been orphaned because of HIV and AIDS. And I just met hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them in every country I went to that were living on the streets. And, these young 5-6-year-olds who are being raped every night by older kids. They're eating out of garbage cans. The young teenage girls, the 13-year-olds are getting pregnant. They're dumping their babies in outdoor pit latrines. They're dumping them on the side of the road. They're dumping them in rivers. And I just knew I couldn't go back to my life of leisure and pleasure, and I had to do something. And so, long, complicated story, we ended up packing up our family and moving to Eswatini. We've been working there since 2005, but moved there permanently 7 years ago once we opened up an orphanage there for orphaned and abandoned babies.
Ian, how about you?
Well, I married a strong-willed woman, and I followed her. I went to Eswatini a number of years ago. I think it was in 2005, and basically saw the need. It's a beautiful country, but the people were really, really sick, and so basically it was not a no-brainer, but it was an area that I thought I could make a difference in. So when we decided to start Heart for Africa and help the people of Eswatini out, that's basically, Janine was already all in, so it wasn't an easy.
Easier to be with me than without me.
There you go.
Okay.
Where grew up in Ottawa?
Yeah, I grew up in Nepean, actually. Born in Ottawa, grew up in Nepean. So I'm a Canadian as well.
Okay, so and what's your, I guess, professional background?
I graduated from Bishop's University. I've got a major in economics, a minor in business, and then worked with L'Oreal here, or Cosmere as it was named, for a few years, and then joined Janine's marketing company. Worked there for 10 years until they closed. And then we're doing this.
And I think that's a really interesting part of the story, because when we got involved as egg farmers, went over to see Project Canaan Heart for Africa, what really struck us was the fact that while many charities are well-intentioned, it's not always easy to deliver success in developing parts of the world. And because of their business background, they're able to think, plan, design, but then also execute on their plans. And so things get done in a very difficult part of the world, and that achievement is just something remarkable to see.
And that was an excerpt of my long interview with Canadian humanitarians Janine and Ian Maxwell and Tim Lambert. He's the CEO of Egg Farmers of Canada. And as you heard him, Egg Farmers of Canada has partnered with the Heart of Africa and its project, the Canaan Farm Project.
Yeah, you can see them there. Not only are they feeding these kids, but there looked like there was little education lessons there as well.
It's a whole operation. So you have, they basically come in as babies. Janine talked about this problem of these babies being abandoned.
That's incredible.
And what she was telling me is that the problem is that most orphanages don't take babies because they take too much work. They need 24-hour care. So theirs is one of the few facilities that actually takes in these newborns and cares for them. And unfortunately, a lot of them die because they're sick, because by the time they get to them. But kind of a statistics she told me is like they run through 500 diapers a day. So it kind of tells you, and you saw the conditions. These children are growing up. They moved their own kids to Africa. Now their kids are grown up and studying here in university in Canada. But she was saying that this was quite an experience for them as well.
How do they finance it?
So through donations. So if you wanna, if you're interested in donating, you go to the project. The links are in my story for Heart for Africa and Project Canaan, and Egg Farmers of Canada also have. Just to give you an example, like a $40 donation a month helps them care for a baby, and then you basically donate as much as you can. So, but that's how they work. I mean, the farm employs about 300 people, so they have to pay salaries.
Well, there's their cost of running a building, the buildings,
the equipment,
fuel for the truck, maintenance for the truck, and so on and so forth.
If this story interests you, find my story on our website. The links are there, and
in fact, in all our stories, if you go to the website, all these stories are excerpts of bigger stories, and if you go to the website, the stories are there, the full interviews there, and all the links are there as well to take you and to get more information on that. So, very interesting story. All right, coming up, we have, as I mentioned before, Remembrance Day coming up in Canada, and we'll have a story about a new book that's just come out. All right, as mentioned, Remembrance Day is coming up, November 11th. It used to be known as Armistice Day because it commemorates the day of signing of the armistice, which ended World War I. And Montreal historian, author, and teacher David O'Keefe has just released his latest historical book. It's called 7 Days in Hell, Canada's Battle for Normandy and the Rise of the Black Watch Snipers. Now, while it describes in limited fashion a bit about the history of the Royal Highland Regiment, it deals mostly with the 7 days of terrible battle leading up to the attack on the German stronghold at Verrières Ridge. It was heavily defended, and it had some of the most experienced and tough German soldiers defending it. and during 3 attempts in which they eventually did take the ridge, but it nearly wiped out the regiment, as a matter of fact. Now, the book is based, of course, on detailed archival research, but also on O'Keefe's own personal, formal and informal interviews with surviving veterans during the time that he was a member of the regiment a couple of decades ago, when there were still a lot of the veterans still alive and still around. And he uses a narrative style which kind of draws you much more into the book. It's not a pedantic historical book. He really deals with personal experiences and emotions and feelings and the sensations of these soldiers because he was able to interview these people. And in this excerpt, I asked him about those personal interviews and whether the memories of these veterans were still as fresh even decades after the events.
They are. I mean, a lot of the experiences that you'll see in the book, these were experiences that were emblazoned on their memories for various reasons. Now, of course, as an academic historian, I have to make sure that I, do my homework and present the context properly, the historical context. But as a result, I mean, these stories add the kind of color and the flair, and it's, it's kind of like a Sunday afternoon book that you kick up and you just join them on their journeys.
But again, when you're talking about memories, I mean, certainly the memory of the smell of burning hair, for example, or the sights, the horrific sights. I mean, that's the kind of thing that you would remember, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, and I think you nailed on it, hit the nail on the head, whether you like it or not. There are things that will stick with you in these moments. And that was one thing when I sat down with them and I had asked them, I tried to get them to be as descriptive as possible. And a lot of them, it wasn't just the sight, but actually the smell. And sometimes they would talk about the smell of the earth being kicked up and how fresh it seemed and how fresh it was. But then they would look around and see the bodies everywhere, and then a waft of decaying flesh would come in. So it was that kind of paradox, if you will, that really struck them and stayed with them forever. And so a lot of times, and particularly at the end of the 7-day period, they're faced with an assault up Verrières Ridge in broad daylight, basically going up against Germans, some of the best units that the Germans have. They have to, advance up a ridge into a horseshoe of fire with Germans on 3 sides. And of course, they do have a discussion amongst themselves of whether they should do this or not. And at the end of the day, they conclude that for regimental pride, as well as some other factors, that they have to do this. There is no way that they can say no and save face. Of course, as you know, when they finally go up Verrières Ridge, only 20 out of 320 men come back to be able to fight the next day. And some of the men that did come back were the snipers. And a lot of people don't realize, but after that happened, there was still one more day of battle for the Black Watch. And that was actually fending off the 9th SS Panzer Division, which was counterattacking. And what was left of the Black Watch, all of about 40 or 50 men, and most of them were snipers, were in a farm in this little town called Saint-Martin, completely surrounded. And they ended up putting in one of the best defensive shows probably in Canadian military history and just basically hanging on by their fingernails. But that moment really, bonded them together. And that's what I said, this is very much a band of brothers tale, and that really brought them together.
So where does this fit into the Canadian effort in World War II?
Well, to be honest with you, the Battle of Verrières Ridge, it's kind of two answers on this one. I mean, first of all, the Battle of Verrières Ridge is without a doubt the Vimy of the Second World War. I mean, once we get Verrières, we essentially crack the German defenses in Normandy, and the rest of the German army starts to collapse at that particular point. But also, too, this is a seminal change for Canadians and also Canadian history and also for Montreal, because remember that the casualties that are taken here by the Black Watch are the men who were supposed to be the leaders in post-war Canada. And you wonder just how much Canada has changed for better or perhaps for worse with them losing their lives at Verrières.
Why do you want people to read this?
It's an essential part of Canadian history. This is a moment that has, in some cases, kind of fallen through the cracks. What I want people to really understand, or basically to develop, is empathy for them. They went through 7 days of living hell. There's no doubt about it. Some of the fiercest fighting we've seen in the Second World War, probably since Passchendaele in World War I. I think it's the idea that we need to get back and we need to truly understand what these people went through, what they were faced. And that's one of the reasons why I ended up writing it the way I did. The idea of a journey, going in and walking in their footsteps yet again, which I think is important for any endeavor in history.
And that was part of my conversation with historian and author David O'Keefe. And that is all the time we have for the program for today. So for Terry and Lavon and myself and Léo Boulanger and Charles-Antoine Lemay and Commander Dutil, take care until next time. Bye-bye.